Tonight's guest, Michael Salsbury, is a husband, he's a father, he's a writer, he's a retired international banking executive, a CEO, endurance junkie, as I can see some of my old running friends out there, and he's an avid ultramarathon trail runner. Rumor has it he does sell popcorn here, but that's not true. So please welcome, for his first book, Michael Salsbury. So I'm going to ask him a few questions, then we'll get the conversation started. But then we're going to open it up to everyone here because everybody pretty much knows Michael, and I'd like to hear from them as well. First of all, you decided to write a book, Michael.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering how that idea came about.
Well, the way it came about was, I think, going back to probably 1994, when things kind of started to change in our lives. People would say, boy, you should write a story about this. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not sure I'm ready for that. And then things continued to happen, and they would say, you should write a story about this. And then I'd say, no, I don't think I'm ready for that. And anyway, you just forward a decade or two, and this answer was kind of the same. It was just I didn't think I had it in my nervous system really to tackle something like that. And I think probably about a decade ago, what I did realize, and I think it was the catalyst to at least start writing, was I think my wife and I both realized that our kids really didn't know the whole story of what we went through with our girls. They didn't really know a lot about our childhood other than little snippets. And so I thought that it was important that I leave something for our kids. And there had been other people who had kind of thought they wanted to maybe take a stab at trying to write it and kind of do it with me, and they did interviews, and I realized very quickly that I had so much kind of locked up inside of myself that if it was ever going to get done, I had to do it.
You're opening yourself up pretty wide here, and I was wondering, were you originally planning to write it just for your family, or were you planning to release this for the public to know your story?
I think initially I just wanted to get, the more I started to write just on notebooks, the more cathartic it became.
Yeah.
And things started to slowly kind of become more and more and sort of take shape. And it was probably maybe a decade ago, an author, some of you may have heard of, named Christopher McDougall. He was here in town, and I think he was promoting, it wasn't Born to Run. For those of you who don't know, he wrote a best-selling book called Born to Run, but he was promoting a book.
Writing with Sherman.
With Sherman, yeah, exactly. And we went out for a beach run, and I told him I was writing a book. He's like, oh, really? What's it about? And I kind of told him, and he said, well, in the first 180 words, if you don't get them then, you're never going to get them. I'm like, oh, okay. And he's like, well, can you tell me what it's about? And I did tell him what it was about, and he stopped in his tracks, and he had tears in his eyes, and he said, Mike, this is a story the world needs to hear.
Wow. That's pretty high
And so coming from Chris McDougall, I was like, okay, all right, then that's kind of when I started more in earnest and but that itself, when I really kind of started writing, was 6 years ago. So for those of you who think that I just knocked this out in like, a year or 18 months, yeah, it was a lot of therapy I went through, and it was a lot of tears writing it, and there were just times where I just had to put it down. And as a first-time author, the whole idea of writer's block and things just not coming, there were things that were in there that they just had to take their time getting out of my subconscious and out of my head, so then I could get them on paper.
You mentioned it was cathartic, and I was just wondering if you using the therapy model. I'm wondering how that worked, how that went hand in hand as you going through therapy, but you're also, again, writing this story and revealing so much about yourself.
Yeah, when we went through this, we never had the luxury of having therapy. Actually, I shouldn't say we didn't have the luxury. I think that we chose not to because we were in such a state of shock. I think it was the time when hospice came into our lives, and it was grudgingly. I mean, it was all guards were up, but there came a time when we finally realized that, you know, we couldn't, Gabriella and I we could not do it on our own anymore. And we finally realized that we needed some help and some support. But yeah, it was, you know, and then having to go back and kind of, you know, with the shovel and dig those things out. There were many things that I either purposely or whatever just blocked that Gabriella remembered, and other things that I remembered that, you know, she completely blocked out. So between both of us remembering and forgetting, I think I was able to kind of encapsulate it, you know, hopefully.
So you and your
fairly
wife
well.
worked together in this process?
No,
No.
we didn't. No.
Okay.
No. And that's a very good point, because my wife, among other things, she's always been tolerant of my, you know, crazy things that I do.
Yeah.
But I realized very early on that if we both got involved, and it was back and forth, and we're both Virgos, so we're perfectionists, and I realized that if it became a collaborative thing, you know, we'd both be 90 years old and we'd never get done.
out.
And but I think the thing that where she was tolerant was that she never read a thing. In the 7 years that I was really working hard on this, or 6 years, I don't even remember anymore, she never read a thing. She never saw a thing. And it wasn't until I was down to about the final draft where every once in a while I would tell her, okay, I'll read you a paragraph. And inevitably I would choose the time on a day that she had worked, and she came home and she was tired, and it was 11 at night. And I would lay down and I would read her a paragraph, and she was sound asleep. And I did that 5 or 6 times. She's like, you know, you keep reading it to me, but you always wait until I'm asleep, so I never know. I don't remember words you told me. So she finally, until that was the first time that she actually read it all the way through.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you didn't have her to work with, but you did work with some other people. You told me you had some more support in the community. And I wanted you to
Yeah,
talk
I
a little
did.
bit about
And I was very fortunate. Again, Chris McDougall, you know, here and there, I would contact him and he would look at things. And then we have a very good friend who's involved in a guy named Arvin Brown, a wonderful gentleman, and he's you know, a legendary Hollywood and TV director. You know, everything from NCIS back to Ally McBeal, and he was the founder of the New Haven Playhouse back in Connecticut. He was instrumental in, you know, because he knows how to read a script and to read a story. A very good people who are here that are involved in the trail running community. A very good friend named John Vanderpot, who's a retired now, but an English professor at San Diego State. He was the first one I gave the really rough draft to, and being an English teacher, I mean, it was very humbling. You know, people who know him, he's just kind of like this quirky running guy that wears a Gilligan's Island hat, you know, bucket hat. But he ripped it apart. I mean, he really showed me, this was 3 years ago, he showed me, I gave it to him in Silverton, Colorado, and about a month later, you know, he said, you know, this is a really great story, but, you know, Mike, you've got a lot of work to do. And I was like, whoa. I mean, 3 years ago, I thought I was like,
done.
I was pretty much done, and I was nowhere near done. So again, as a rookie, first-time author, it was one of those very humbling things where it was like, wow, okay. But it helped me get better. And then we have another friend of a friend who I had a little bit of contact with, but more just reading his work, a gentleman named Bill Finnegan, who wrote a book called Barbarian Days. Yeah, and
Pulitzer Prize winner.
Yes, yeah. And I think that one of the, if I can just, before getting too long-winded, the best advice that Chris McDougall gave me when I asked him, how do you write? I mean, I'm a banker, I'm not a writer. He said, you know, the best advice I can give you is just write the way you talk, and try and think of it that way when you're writing things down, and when you're writing, you know, conversational things. Just, you know, how would you talk to just one of your buddies?
Mm-hmm.
I was like, all right. That was something that made sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't overly complicated, which I knew I was not nearly capable enough as a writer to really get, you know, very artsy or complicated about it. And so I think that it actually served me well. Mm-hmm. And when I read it now, I'm like, okay, with the advice that I got, it really, I can see it anyway, it really comes through.
I think that's the mistake of a lot of writers, is trying to get too artsy as opposed to even some of the well-known pieces. And I think yours is more of a conversational style. You're telling a story like you're orally telling the story, and that's what I found appealing about your book.
Yeah, I thank you. But on the other hand, I found that's much more difficult to write.
Is it?
Yeah, for me it was. You know, writing in a kind of a conversational way between two
Mm-hmm.
people, whether it was between two others or me and someone else. It was, again, it was something that I feel that I learned along the way. And I feel very fortunate that it all came together towards the end, where the story was coming together and I was getting better.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, I would have been really worried if the story was coming to an end and I was looking at it thinking, gosh, I really don't think I'm that good of a writer.
Mm-hmm.
You know, whether this thing was just going to fall flat. But by the time it all came together, I was like, yeah, you know, I think this is going to be pretty good.
I think you've shared the opinion of 99% of the writers out there that they're not very good until they get to a certain point. They push beyond that point of not being very good, and
Yeah.
so it worked out, I think. A couple more questions,
Sure.
and then I'll turn it over. As far as the obvious running from tragedy, the title of the book, the photo, that's been an integral part of your life, and I'd like you to share how you shared that theme within the overall tome of this book.
Yeah, I'm 65 years old. I've been running for 46 years. So it's basically the thing that other than it's the thing I've been doing for longer than just about anything. I've been married 36 years, and I've been running for 46. So I've been doing it 10 years longer than I was married. And it's always been a part of my life, and it has enriched it in more ways than I'll ever be able to articulate. But what it did end up doing that was unexpected was it became my therapy.
Mm-hmm.
At a certain point in my life. It became quite literally a savior. There were times years ago when I was out running and really, wondering hard, if I was going to be able to keep going forward,
Mm-hmm.
And so, it helped me through some very, very dark times,
Mm-hmm.
without a doubt. And so, it's just, to have the story come full circle where it's continued to be a part of my life, but then with so many unexpected surprises that happened, kind of as our lives progressed and the sun, eventually after so many dark years started to shine again. It was really, it sort of reinvigorated my love and my appreciation and thankfulness for the sport. Mm-hmm. For sure.
Not only is there the physical and the emotional, there's also the scientific and medical components that you included in this book, and I wanted to see if you could talk a little bit about the themes of that.
Yeah, it was a big part of our lives for many years, and I think to this day in the worldwide field of pediatric neurology, you know, we're still like the poster family that, you know, we can call the top pediatric neurologist around the world, and if they hear our last name, they'll take our call.
Wow.
For many years, for kind of the wrong reasons, but you know, we went through so much hope and despair and times wondering, you know, and sort of like hollow promises and, you know, throwing darts, because for years they couldn't tell us anything. The best they could do was guess, and they cloaked those guesses in, you know, sort of hopefulness, which we, after, you know, the second or third time, you start to realize, yeah, they don't know any more than we know. But what we didn't realize was that there were scientists working all over the world tirelessly that were trying to find answers for us, and we fully expected that we would never find, you know, what took the lives of our daughters in our lifetimes. And lo and behold, a call came in 2005 that was out of the blue, and started what would become kind of the, you know, the final third of the book, where we went from having two beautiful children. We drew the line in the sand. There were never going to be any more kids. We couldn't put ourselves through it. We knew we couldn't survive it again, my wife and I. We weren't going to put our son and our daughter through it. And suddenly there was this phone call, which changed a lot. But what it did show is that science never gave up, and they finally gave us answers that we never expected. And yeah, it was amazing. But we owe so much to, you know, researchers out there that just, you know, are dealing with, it's one thing if you're dealing with something that's very known, but when you're dealing with something that has not even been discovered yet.
Yeah.
And, you know, it was because of us that they were able to announce this discovery to the world in a very sort of odd way. You know, you sort of feel a sense of pride that, you know, our family had something to do with that. On the other hand, it wasn't as though it was for free.
Yeah. My last question is, since this is a local story, you really put yourself out there, and some of the people who actually asked about the book had no idea. They just know you from the running community. And I get the feeling that it was a complicated process for you to be able to do so.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because a lot of the people that know us from, I would say, the running community, they just know my wife and me, and I think more in the trail running community, when we started bringing our youngest son Sebastian around when he was about 8 years old, it was like, you know, what's this family doing with this little kid? And, you know, and by the time he was, you know, 9 or 10, he was out running 30, 40, 50 miles in the mountains out here. So they saw us as this family with this young kid who was running. What they didn't know was the story behind the fact that the fact that he was even there.
Yeah.
Was, you know, it was 1 in a million odds that that little boy was even running around there. So I thought that probably there would be people in the running community or in the local community that knew us, but they didn't know that. And then also with school, you know, people would ask for years, you know, you've got 3 kids that are 8 years apart. We're like, yeah, you know, it's like I traveled to Europe, my work took us over there. It just, you know, for many years it was not the comfortable cocktail party conversation. So it was, yeah, it was my work, you know, and that's just kind of the way that it played out. You don't say, yeah, there were 3 other children in between there, and then it just like descends into like tears. And I went there a few times, and it was at Christmas parties or something, and it started as a very innocent conversation, and it would always end the same way, right? The people would just be like absolutely just, in tears and crying and hugging me, and so I had to realize that, it had to be a very special situation to tell that story. But, in doing this, especially Gabriella, she was like, "Are you ready? Are you ready to put that all out there?" And I think at this point, at this age in my life, you're not embarrassed by much anymore. You don't really, if people like it, that's great. If they don't, you don't really care either. And so I was like, I think I'm finally ready to just, put it all out there. So there'll be people that read it that think they know us. A lot of people in the community are like, for years, maybe even decades, thought, they know the Salsbury family.
Yeah.
From the community and from my business world. But if they haven't read that, they don't know the Salsbury family. Wow. But they will when they read that.
Does anybody have a question for Mike?
Why isn't there a warning about sadness? I was in an airport that was very packed, and I was sobbing.
Oh no!
And people were really looking at the old lady. I'm just commenting.
Well, I will tell you that one of the things that I mentioned early to Michael is I said, I can do a Q&A, I think, okay, but if I have to do a reading, I would have to be very, very thoughtful about what I read, because the same as you.
Thank you.
I still, there's many, many areas of that book that it was my life, it was our life, and I still can't get through it. So, so I think the fact that it made you cry is actually, thank you very much, because...
Any other questions or comments?
It made me cry too.
See, if it made you cry, Greg, I consider that a badge of honor. Can I get a show of hands of people that actually know me or know us that have not read it? Okay, so there's a few. So one of the things another community thing that's very interesting is a lot of people, I would tell them I'm writing a book, and they would ask what it's about. That's another thing. They would ask what it's about. I'd say, it's really a long story, because again, it's like the children 8 years apart. It's just it's hard to tell the story, and just like, writing the synopsis was absolutely agonizing.
Oh, I bet.
Because just kind of like shrinking that down. But a lot of people, I would say, well, it's a long story, and certain people I would say, but you should read it because you're in it. and particularly actually in the trail running world, there's a lot of people I told them, I said, you should read it because you're actually in it. And they're like, really? And then there's another thing where, again, this is Chris McDougall said, there's a lot of things where you have a little bit, because you're the writer, you can take poetic license, and you have some flexibility with memory and things. And there was one, there's a runner that a lot of people will know. His name is Tommy Silva, and his wife Michelle. I totally had it in my mind that during a particular run that Sebastian had turned his ankle and he was in distress, and I had gone to pick up Gabriella, and I told her, I said, you're in the book. And she read it, and she's like, Mike, I loved your book, but I just wanted to tell you I wasn't at that event. I'm like, what? And she's like, yeah. She said, her husband, she says, Tommy was there. I don't know who taped up his ankle, but it wasn't me. And she's in the book in all its glory, And so that'll be one of those things that forever she doesn't know who it could be. Her husband doesn't know. And obviously I thought I knew, but I didn't. So, yeah. But anyway, it was like one of those things where she was actually, I thought was in it, but she wasn't.
One more question. Come on, anyone? Comment?
I have another question.
Two more.
Would you be comfortable doing the screenwriting for that if they decided to move forward?
That's actually an interesting comment. I can tell you, I don't know. So early on, years ago, I think somebody was they were wanted to kind of take a crack at doing a screenplay, and I was like, all right, sure. Well, I mean, and they, I think a year later they came back and they showed it to me. And first of all, I'd never read the way a screenplay works,
Right.
and I was like, wow, this is. And then the way that they took it and like portraying like intimate things between my wife and I was like, so I think maybe I'm a first time author, and reading a screenplay or an attempt at one, I was like, no. But anyway, I will tell you, I know that it's at William Morris right now. I have no idea, and I don't have no hope or no expectation, or if anyone else would come forward. I was approached by them, and I was like, yeah, what? I mean, I've always been a person where I don't close doors before they're open, for the most part. And so, I don't know, we'll see. I know that the movie that would most closely resemble it was a movie years ago called Lorenzo's Oil. And it dealt with the particular category of diseases that our daughters had. They knew that when ours was unknown at the time. The Adone family, Susan Sarandon, I think, was nominated for Best Actress for her portrayal. The Adone family, when I said that we're the poster family for that particular pediatric neurological disorder, we sort of overtook the Adone family once, their son Lorenzo, I think, passed away. The irony was that that Lorenzo, who was the child who was ill, actually outlived both of his parents in the end, which was kind of a sad irony about the whole thing. And he also outlived Dr. Moser, who's actually portrayed in the book. Peter Ustinov played him in the movie, and Dr. Moser, Peter Ustinov's part was based on Dr. Moser. So Lorenzo, who was the sick child, outlived all of them. But my point is, it's not an uplifting. I mean, this one at the end, I think, does become uplifting at the end. Lorenzo's Oil, it was very sad. And I think these days, whether it's romantic comedies or whatever it might be, I'm not sure whether, I mean, if you were bawling your eyes out in an airport, I mean, I guess, emotional movies, I think, are good in different. I think the timing has to be right, I guess.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
Hey, thanks for sharing. You're such an intimate part of your life. I think it's incredible. My question is, how did you help support and navigate giving Gabriella's line of work in dealing with babies and the possibility of loss and unexpected loss, and how that affected your family?
Well, I mean, it's a big part of the book. It's a very special human being, my wife. Not only is she special just as a human being and my wife and the mother of our kids, but, when you think about, there was a point in time where she was actually working while our first daughter was dying on a different floor in the same at Cottage Hospital. And I think at a certain point, it became, as strong as she was and is, she couldn't even take it anymore. And I think it was the whole part of that. And then, on sort of a happier note, when and this is one of the best stories. This is a great cocktail story. Talking about the birth of our youngest son Sebastian. Gabriella was working in the NICU at Cottage, and I think the plan was that she was going to work until 2 weeks before the due date, and then have the last 2 weeks. And it was her last shift, and I was getting ready at 7 p.m. to go pick her up, and she said, yeah, she goes, I'm feeling a little bit of tightening. Just come on down at 7:30, and I'm going to go walk over to the birth center and get checked, and then we'll go home. And I'm driving down, and she's like, I'm 7 centimeters. Get your ass down here. So she literally worked her last shift in the NICU at probably 4, 5, 6, 7 centimeters, and I got down there. She checked in. She's still in her scrubs. She checked in to give birth to Sebastian, still in her scrubs. And Sebastian had a little bit of a problem, and like I think all the other kids, Gabriella never had one of these long, drawn-out 12-hour labors. I mean, it was like boom. We got in there, and I think it was 45 minutes later. She finished her shift. It was like an hour, checked in, and in labor 45 minutes, and that was it. But Sebastian had a little bit of problem when he was born. I don't get into the whole, technical part of it, but it was the only time where I actually saw the NICU where Gabriella worked. And by the way, after what we'd been through, I was totally averse to hospitals. I mean, I think I've been in Cottage maybe 2 or 3 times in the last, 20 years, just because I think my mind's just been so marked by things. But the whole joke was that she worked her last shift, never left the hospital. Sebastian was born on a Friday, and he went, and she didn't even get overtime.
But you got a pro runner in the process.
Yeah. So anyway, to answer
trio.
the question, it was, the whole part of the work and what Gabriella does, it's, the monumental strength that it had to have taken, I don't even know, for Gabriella to be, working, and at the same time that, her daughter is fighting for her life, she's, welcoming these parents, with newborn children, and telling them how to breastfeed, and they're overjoyed with this new addition to their family, while at the same time, our little daughter's fighting for her life, on the next floor.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, Michael, it's an incredible story, running from tragedy. Thank you so much for coming, Michael Salsbury.